Well, let me just say a few words also, and thanksgiving for the faithfulness of your attendance all during this series and for how you've stayed with it. This is not light material, I understand that, and it's also material that you're probably not as familiar with and certainly not as biblically based as some things you might listen to. I do think it's critically important for our time because the standard worldview in the scientific community is evolutionary. No question about it. You've seen the advertisements for the Ben Stein movie called Expelled. The whole point of that movie is scientists who let it be known they believe in intelligent design are in trouble in the scientific community. They are literally, in some cases, expelled. A classic case of that is a gentleman who was a professor at the University of San Francisco. He was widely known for his expertise in the origin of life experiments and wrote books about it. One of his books was called Biochemical Evolution. That ought to tell you where he was coming from. He changed his mind as a result of having studied the origin of life experiments and decided this could not have happened without some intelligent design. And when he let that be known, the University of San Francisco fired him from teaching biology, even though that was his expertise. They let him do some other stuff. I am thankful to say I don't say much good things about the ACLU, but they defended him and got him back in the classroom, but they wouldn't let him do anything but teach laboratories, not lecture, because he let it be known that he was an intelligent design proponent. That's not untypical. So that's why I think this is so important. I want our young people to know and everybody to know that there's a basis for our faith in the natural world as well. And I think it's more powerful than ever. So today we're going to have fun, if you like chemistry. And I know you do. If you don't, it's because you didn't have me as a teacher. The argument from complexity is the same argument we've been making in this whole series. It's the argument from design. Let's see if we can get this thing to work for us. So I thought we'd look at a couple of passages of Scripture. Since this is Sunday, seems appropriate. And since all of you are associated with us, I don't think we have any other visitors here today. Psalm 139, verse 13, of course, speaks of being fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's a blessing that we can see that in the natural world also, and as we've used Romans 1 every time. It's the argument from design, isn't it? It's the same argument we've been making the whole time, looking at it from a little different perspective. And as we've said before, there are only two answers to this question. You either came about by natural causes, or you came about by intelligent design. Today we're going to be talking about complex organs, complexity. Complex organs either came about by natural causes or they were designed. I don't think there are any other answers. And complex organs are parts of living things. And I think they're sufficient to convince us. So we're going to look at evidence of the natural world. Down here, what is the natural world best we know right now? And then we're going to ask, which is more reasonable, intelligent design or natural causes? Same thing we've been doing all through the series. Okay, so let's let Darwin speak to us. I'm going to make you raise your hand this time. How many of you have read Darwin's Origin of Species? Parts of it. Oh, that was my next question. How many of you have read parts of Darwin's Origin? Okay, I have to agree, it's a hard book to plow through all the way through. But I would say to you, in my opinion, I don't believe there is a text that has had a greater impact on humanity in terms of our views of how we came to be, other than the Bible. I mean, this is the most impactful, of course. I think this is second. It has impacted every discipline, every area of life. And it had such a powerful impact that it swept the intellectual community after 1859. years of public. There were some men and women who picked up the banner, like Thomas Huxley, who came to be called Darwin's Bulldog, and a number of others who defended his position, and it just really swept the world. Here we are 150 years later. It is still the dominant worldview, and Darwin is given the primary credit for making it scientifically respected. I'll tell you an interesting thing about this book. A great portion of this book is criticizing his own theory. That makes me think he was an honest man, because he critiques his own theory. He tells you what's wrong with it, and then he proceeds to explain it away. But I like that. So in that sense, I think this book is an approach by an honest man. So, for example, on complex organs, here's what he said. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. So he just tells you, here's how you can disprove my theory. If you could come up with any complex organ, now listen carefully, because this is the key to Darwin's theory. You have to have numerous, successive, slight modifications. Darwin would say nature abhors leaps. That's not the way nature functions. You can't just go, boom, from a frog to a bird. That's not the way nature does it. Darwin's theory was nature looks at small changes which are produced naturally, and it looks at those changes and says, now, which of these is better for the organism in terms of survival? And then it selects those that are most likely to survive. The others die out. And then so little by little things change. And it's the succession of slight modifications over long periods of time that add up to dramatic changes. That's his theory. Descent of modification. Modification is supplied by nature. And nature selects the things that can survive it. You see that? That's his basic theory. And he based it on his notion that he personally could take pigeons, just a kind of Heinz 57 variety of pigeons, and he knew that over a period of time he could selectively breed those pigeons and turn them into something entirely different from what he started with. Now, they were still pigeons, but they looked completely different, and they'd have certain characteristics, and you could do that by artificial breeding. All of you know that can happen. Well, he said, if we can do that by artificial breeding, why can't nature do that by natural selection? That's the idea. So on this topic, as on all the topics in here, slight, successive, numerous modifications. If it doesn't happen that way, my theory doesn't work. So here's an illustration. It came directly out of this book. Darwin's Black Fox by Michael Behe. Maybe you've heard of this book. Excellent little book. And by the way, it's come out in a late edition, so if you have the old edition, get rid of it and get the new one. 10 years later, he wrote that book. And the argument is even more powerful. Really better than ever. So this example I'm about to show you came out of Behe's book. I like it a lot. Suppose that's your front yard. I hope your yard looks better than that. But suppose this is your yard, and see this little ditch right here? Maybe you come out of your front door and you say, some guy's standing in your yard. You say, what are you doing in my yard? He said, I just jumped over the ditch. Came over to see your yard. He said, well, jump back over. That yard looks even worse. Suppose this is your yard. Why anybody would want to go there, I don't know. But Suppose you get over here and you find somebody in your yard. You say, what are you doing? How'd you get over here? He said, I just jumped over the ditch. Probably a 3-foot ditch. I think I could do that. That's not unreasonable. So you say, jump back over the ditch and get out of my yard. Well, what if the ditch is that big? You see that guy? He looks like he's about to jump. Or maybe you're over here, and this is your yard, and you find this guy over there in your yard and say, how'd you get over? He said, I jumped over that ditch. He's going to say, I want to see that. That's about a 10-foot ditch. You'd have to be an Olympic champion dog jumper. What about if it's this ditch? You know, you begin to stretch your imagination, don't you? If your yard is over here, and he started over there, and he said, I just jumped over the right with whose helicopter? And then he says to you, no, what really happened is I started over here, and there were these buttes. I would jump from one butte to the next butte to the next butte to the next butte. I just got across that way. And you look out there and say, I don't see that many buttes on it. And he says, well, after I jumped off the butte, it kind of deteriorated. So it's not there. I think he said, let's change the subject. The point of this man's article is, you reach a point of incredulity that a guy jumped over that ditch. And what he argues is when you look at some of these complexities of complex organs in nature, it's more like a Grand Canyon than it is a little 350. And while you might make the argument, like Darwin would say, well, it takes a bunch of little smaller jumps. Every one of those smaller jumps becomes a Grand Canyon. The deeper you look. So I really like that illustration. We'll come back to it in the course of this discussion. Now, lest I forget later, I mentioned this book to you last night. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I'd sure recommend it to you. It's a powerfully good book by Geisler and Frank Turek. Extremely well known. Okay. There's that statement again. Any complex organ existed. Can you find me one? Darwin would say. And if I were in a debate with Darwin, I'd say, yes, I can find you one. Let's start with this one. You think Darwin knew about the human eye? Why, he did. They knew a lot about the human eye in 1850. Not everything we know, but they certainly knew a lot about the human eye. It had been dissected and carefully examined. In fact, here's what Darwin said about the eye in that book. He didn't ignore a tough subject. Here's what he said. To suppose that the eye, with all of its inimitable contrivances, don't you love that? Let me say it in British. With all the inimitable contrivances, for adjusting the focus to different distances. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that the eye can adjust the focus automatically? You know that. You bring the book closer to you, your eyes adjust the focus. And you don't say, now, will you please adjust focus for me? The eye just does it, doesn't it? And if you get it farther away, or you're looking at a distance, your eye automatically adjusts. What that's doing, in case you don't know the physics, is it's changing the focal length of the lens. By the way it adjusts. Which means you can see double distance. The eye does that automatically. Okay, Darwin knew about that. Then he says, and for admitting different amounts of light, you do know, don't you? You come in a dark room, what happens? The pupil expands automatically. You don't have to say, well, now, pupil, will you please expand? It just opens up to let more light in. And when the lights are turned back on, you can hardly see, and it starts closing up. Automatically. Well, he knew that. And how about this? And for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberrations, your eye is capable of making some automatic correction
He knew all of that. So he said, to suppose that the eye, with all of these things, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. And I say, Amen. I mean, he admitted that himself. It seems ridiculous to say that this could have formed by small, slight modifications over long periods of time. How do you do that? Then he proceeds to tell you how it did happen. By natural selection. Yet reason tells me that in numerous gradations from a perfect and complex eye to one very imperfect and simple, each grade being useful to its possessor can be shown to exist. All right, I interrupt the quote again. Is it true that in nature there are lots of different kinds of eyes? From a very simple eye to a very complex one. And can you demonstrate that the simple eye has some value and the more complex one has value for the possessor? You wouldn't argue with that, would you? There are lots of different kinds of eyes that exist, from a very simple one to a very complex one, and each one you can argue that there's some benefit. That's what he's saying. Second, if further the eye does vary ever so slightly, would you agree that nature provides variation in eyes? Just look around you. In this one room, we have a lot of variation in eyes. So yes, nature supplies variation. Some of you are wearing glasses. Some of you are not. Some of you weren't wearing glasses, but now you are. So there's variation automatically that nature supplies. Would you agree? Okay. Next, he says, and that the variations be inherited. Can we argue that variations in eyes are inherited? I think they are. I wore glasses for a long time, and I wore contacts. Thank you, Mom and Dad, who both wore glasses. Yeah, we inherit characteristics. There's no question about that. All right, then he says, which is certainly the case, and if any variation or modification in the organ be ever useful to an animal under changing conditions of life, would you agree that modifications can be useful to an animal under conditions? Then he said, the difficulty of believing that a perfect and complex eye can be formed by natural selection, though insuperable by our imagination, can hardly be considered. Here's the argument. If there are simple eyes, why can you not believe that over a long period of time, simple eyes became more complex, little by little, small changes, and each of those changes was beneficial to the one who got it. And it was inherited. And the ones with the better eyes did better. Some of the other ones died off. So gradually over time, slight, small modifications can produce more complex. Nature does it. You don't need any God. I did. The argument. Let me show you a little more detail. Jellyfish. You know jellyfish have eyes? On the top up here, there's a little simple photoreceptor. What do I mean by that? There's a little light-sensitive spot on the top of the jellyfish. All in the world it does is respond when light hits it. So the jellyfish has some concept that light is this direction or that direction. And it responds to it. Look, all that is, folks, is a light-sensitive spot. And here's what Darwin would say. Class, one of the things I want to do is make you think like an evolutionist. Because I hear Christians saying, evolution is so stupid, how can anyone ever believe it? It is not completely stupid. You seriously think the evolutionary theory swept the whole intellectual community because it's totally stupid? If you think that, you're not thinking straight. Evolution does explain some things. Now try to think with Darwin. Is it difficult to imagine that a little light-sensitive spot could have evolved by itself? That's a very simple thing. Maybe you had a spot up here that had some chemical that got mutated. Do mutations happen, ladies and gentlemen? They do happen. Suppose that chemical got mutated in a sense that it became sensitive to light. Maybe the chemistry changed enough that when light hits it, it has some reaction. That seemed like a simple enough thing that maybe nature could have done that by itself. That's the argument. So why don't you think, class, the complex eye didn't just boom appear. That's saltation. That's leaps. No, the first eye was probably just a little sensitive, light-sensitive spot there. And nature could do that by itself. You don't need God for that. See what I'm saying? And then Darwin would say to you, do such eyes exist? Yes, the jellyfish have. So maybe that was the simplest kind of eye that first came into existence. The marine limpet has an eye too. And basically the marine limpet's eye, listen to me class, is a little cup. The top of his head is cupped a little bit, and at the bottom of the cup there's a light-sensitive spot. Basically the only difference is the light-sensitive spot's now in a little dip. Now, is it hard to imagine that maybe over time a surface of that being developed a dip? And it happened to have the light-sensitive spot in the dip. Is there an advantage, ladies and gentlemen, to having a light-sensitive spot at the bottom of a dip? Yes, there is, because it tends to focus the light on it. Because the light shines into the dip, and it's more likely to hit the photosensitive spot. At least to be focused on it. So that would be a slight advantage. So Darwin would say to you, class, a dip with a light-sensitive spot is a little better than just a light-sensitive spot. And who thinks that making a dip is hard to do? Nature could do that. So maybe that was the next phase. And so your question is probably going to be, then why do we still have limpets with dipped eyes? And please don't say that, because that's too easy to answer. Here's what Darwin would say. Jellyfish evolved along that branch, and they're still here. But as the eye was evolving, certain ones of those beings maybe went off on this direction and got a little better eyes, while the jellyfish still existed. See what I'm saying? So maybe the next most complex eye was the dipped with the photosensitive spot. And here's the next thing. Snails have eyes too. Class, the snail eye is like this. It's got a dip with light-sensitive spots at the bottom, and it's got a little lens over the top. And that's basically all it is. Now, is it hard to imagine, class, that maybe over time a slight film could develop over the top of that dip by natural causes? Maybe something mutated a little bit, and you've got this little lens over the top. And that would give some advantage, wouldn't it? Because a lens focuses light better. So maybe that's the next stage in the development of the complex eye. And do we have such things? Yeah, snails got them. You see the argument? So maybe the next thing to develop was the complex eye of the fruit fly, which is a little different kind of eye. Got different features to it. And look, I'm skipping a bunch of steps in here. You see, the ultimate reductionism, when you read Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, he says any complex organ you take can be broken down into small enough steps over long periods of time to add up to making something really complex, and it looks like it was designed, but it wasn't. That's the whole argument, class. Okay? And maybe eventually we get the honeybee with pretty simple eyes and a compound eye, and maybe we get the eagle's eye, which has some features like ours, some better than ours, some not as good as ours, and maybe then you eventually get ours. Now, you see I've skipped a bunch of steps in here, but you see the picture. And Darwin's conception was, as is evolutionists' picture today, just break it down in enough small steps and nature can do that by itself. I tell you, class, that is not a completely stupid idea. It has some reason. Now, I think it breaks down. The fact is, I believe to get from a snail eye to a honeybee's eye, or to a eagle's eye, or to our eye, is a Grand Canyon! Not just some little thing. And even to go from no light-sensitive spot to a light-sensitive spot, from what we know now about how eyes work, that little tiny step, which Darwin thought, that's nothing. Nature can do that. We now know that's another Grand Canyon. And you have to make up the buttes in between. How a nerve comes to be sensitive to light hardly concerns us. More than how life itself first originated. Whoa! Should it concern us how life first originated? Well, I think so. It's only life and death, that's all. Well, how a nerve? See, he thought that a little nerve that's got sensitivity to light, who cares about that? Folks, if he had known the chemistry around a light-sensitive spot, I don't believe Darwin would ever have made up his theory. Because the chemistry of even that is Grand Canyon. How'd you get there? Massive change. Don't tell me that's some little tiny change. But Darwin, in some senses, can be forgiven. Because much of what he knew and what we know today was a black box to him. Not with all the chemistry we know now, folks. So when somebody starts talking to me about the evolution of the eye, I say, hold up. I'm not interested in talking to you until you can explain to me the chemistry underneath it. There's no use talking. And now, of course, I have to show you the chemistry. Ready, class? You know I'm going to make you stand up if you expect one. Here's Dawkins' reductionist argument. Look at what he says. Vision that is 5% as good as yours or mine is very much worth having in comparison with no vision at all. So is 1% vision better than total blindness, and 6% better than 5, 7 than 6, and so on up the gradual continuum. You see that? You know my answer to Dawkins? What do you mean 5% vision? How do you have 5% vision? You either have vision or you don't have it. How do you have 5% vision? That's the stupid thing about that statement. And when you figure out how vision works, you tell me how you're going to have 5% of it. Who says there will be vision at all if all you got 5%? All right, so here's the book, Darwin's Black Box, which has come out in a new edition. He deals in this book, among other things, with the biochemistry of vision. It is fascinating. Now, my only challenge is I have 3 things I want to talk to you about. I don't know how much you can stand. I know one thing, you can only stand as much as your seat can handle. So when you get worn out, you tell me and I'll stop. I love talking about this stuff. Biochemistry of vision. Darwin knew pretty much all of that. The eyeball has been dissected. Probably most of you know pretty well, don't you, that there is the cornea, the lens, the iris, the pupil. You know, don't you, that this whole body in here, anybody know what that's called? It's all this stuff in here. It's called the vitreous body. See it right there? All of this stuff is kind of a inside your eyeball. Did you know, class, that there is a layer at the back of that vitreous body? See this kind of purple layer right here? Anybody know what that's called? See, yeah, the back of your eyeball. No, it's called the retina. See that right there? This is the retina. That thin layer right there. The retina, ladies and gentlemen, is what we've learned receives the light signal. And then it acts on it. It turns it into electrons. But you know, if you know all of that, you still don't know 1/10 millionth of the story. And today, we can take that retina right there, we can magnify it. Here's a piece of it. Here's the neural layer of the human retina. See this piece right here? That's the retina blown magnified. I forget how many times. Magnified considerably. So that's how it looks down inside. And then over here, this is a piece of that retina magnified even more. So now you see in here the bipolar neurons, the ganglions, the optic nerve fibers down here. You see this? And the Mueller cell and the rods of the cones up here. We can see that now, class. Darwin didn't know anything about that. But that's not all. You take one of those rods and cones and blow that up. You see that rod right there? There's the human rod cell. We can magnify that so you can see it. And down here you see is the synaptic body. Here's the nucleus. This is just a cell, ladies and gentlemen. It's got a nucleus, but it's got some very specialized organelles within it. See those microtubules? You see these discs up here? Boy, that is important. This particular cell has a bunch of discs in it. It's a very specialized cell. Can I take a little side trip here with you this week? You know, when an egg from a lady is fertilized by a sperm from a man, and you get this one fertilized egg, in that one fertilized egg is the capacity to make everything in your body. Did you know that? Its DNA is the information stored to make every kind of cell in your body. Those cells at the beginning, when they start to multiply, are called convolutions. We say convolutions, and we use it to refer to God. They mean that those cells at that stage in their development can go any direction and produce any kind of cell in the entire body. In the development process, at some point in time, they start differentiating. So when you reach about 128 cells after it's split, the cells over here start differentiating and they start making something different than these are here. How all that happens is under great investigation right now. Fascinating topic. We live in an exciting time. How is it that some of those cells can make a cell like that? That's a weird one. It's your eye rod cell. And it's got characteristics with both. At the beginning, every cell in your body can make any of these cells. That's amazing, isn't it? It's all built in. All right. There's your rod cell. That was a little side trip free of charge. But we can't just see that. You see this little piece right here? That is magnified to produce this. So this piece is this right here. And there are those discs blown up, magnified. And here's some of the microtubules and mitochondrion, and the nucleus is down here. That's 0.5. Anybody know what that means? Micro. So that's a half of a micrometer. Very tiny. But we can look down inside and see this. Now, what's even more important, class, is what's going on up here in these discs. So you see that little tiny piece right there? Here's a blow-up of that. That little tiny piece of the disc is made up of these disc membranes like this, over in a space between the plasma membrane out here on the side. There's the plasma membrane with its openings, and here are the discs. And ladies and gentlemen, that's where the chemistry action takes place. And now we know what's going on in there. We know how you can see. So I'm going to explain to you now the chemistry of the human eye and how it works. I don't have this memorized. I'm going to turn to the appropriate pages in here. And by the way, in this book, Behe does a really nice thing. All the real heavy chemistry he kind of sets off
so you can skip it and still get the point. I'm not skipping it. I'm going to tell you the chemistry. Are you ready? All right, let's go to the next slide. Here are those discs. See these discs? And here's that channel over here. Here's the external membrane. Here's the channel. And here's all the chemistry going on. So listen close. We'll have a quiz on this later. When the light first strikes the retina, a photon interacts with a molecule called 11-cis retinal, which rearranges within picoseconds to trans-retinal. A picosecond is the time it takes light to travel the breadth of a human hair. How fast does light travel? 186,000 miles per second. So how long do you think it would take to cross one hair? That's a picosecond. That's how fast things are happening. Amazing. Okay, so when light strikes the retina, a photon changes one molecule into another. And the shape goes from something like this to something like that. That's step one. The change in the shape of the retinal molecule forces a change in the shape of the protein rhodopsin. There's rhodopsin right there, to which retinal is tightly bounded. The protein's metamorphosis alters its behavior. It is now called metarhodopsin 2. The protein sticks to another protein called transducin. Right there. So these two have now stuck together. Before bumping into metarhodopsin 2, transducin had tightly bound a small molecule called GDP, but when transducin interacts with it, the GDP falls out and the molecule GTP binds to the transducin. You see the GTP right there, binding to the transducin. That all happens right before these two bump into each other. The GTP transducin metarhodopsin 2 now binds to a protein called phosphodiesterase, right there, PDE. Located on the inner brain of the cell, the inner membrane of the cell. When attached to metarhodopsin 2 and its entourage, would you like that word? Entourage. The phosphodiesterase acquires the chemical ability to cut a molecule called cGMP. Initially, there's a lot of cGMP in the cell, but the phosphodiesterase lowers its concentration as if it were pulling a plug out of a bathtub, and the water lowers. So look. The cGMP is cut by the PDE and becomes 5-GMP, so the amount of cGMP goes down. You got it? That's clear. Now, may I interrupt my quote here just a minute? If you were in my chemistry class, we'd be spending 3 days on it. There's a lot of chemistry going on. We're hitting the buttes. There's much more to this story than what we're telling. Another membrane protein that binds cGMP is called the ion channel. You see this ion channel right here? Normally, the ion channel allows sodium ions to flow into the cell. See sodium right there? Right there. It flows in. While a separate protein activity actively pumps them out. So there's another protein. I should start having you tell me an answer. May I say to you, class, by the time I get finished with this, there are about 15 different specific proteins involved in this. Now let's see here. Where am I? When the amount of cGMP is reduced because of cleavage by the phosphodiesterase, the ion channel closes. See, that channel closes up, causing the cellular concentration of positively charged sodium ions to be reduced. This causes an imbalance of charge across the cell membrane that finally causes a current to be transmitted down to the optic nerve and then to the brain. So through this channel, you get a current being flowing. It flows down here and it ultimately goes way over there to the brain. That's how the light becomes an electrical current. Chemical current. Now, that's all very clear. Let me tell you what we haven't told you. When that goes through that optic nerve and goes up to the brain then takes that electrical impulse and it translates it into a three-dimensional color picture. Have we told you anything about how that happened? Not one word. It is utterly incredible how that happened. Okay, I offer my apology to every eyeball.
because we have not done them justice. But do you see from just this little piece how complicated this is? And we haven't started, class. If the reactions I just told you about were the only ones that operated in the cell, the supply of 11-cis-retinal, cGMP, and sodium ions would quickly be depleted. Something has to turn this off, or you would go blind in a matter of minutes. When the cGMP level falls, shutting down the ion channel, the calcium ion concentration decreases too. The phosphodiesterase enzyme, which is which destroys cGMP, slows down at a lower calcium rate. So that's the first thing that happens to start reversing the process. Second, a protein called guanylate cyclase. So I'm going to test you, class. If something ends in ASE, what is it? Yeah, it's a specific kind of protein called an enzyme. So here's a second enzyme, guanylate cyclase. Let me go to the next slide. Don't forget this one. See, before I only told you about the forward reaction here. And I'll repeat, if the forward reaction is all that happened, you'd go blind. But your body has built into it an automatic process that starts a reverse reaction to restore what you had. By the way, there's another interesting thing about enzymes. A catalyst is a substance that speeds up reaction and then it is left alone to be used. Does that sound like a plan? So guanylate cyclase is an enzyme that helps this reverse reaction take place so that the GTP is restored to GDP, so that the ion channel opens back up again and you get sodium and calcium flowing again, which causes a depolarization of the plasma membrane and increases systolic calcium ions. It restores what you had before, so you can see again. And that is constant battle. You've been sitting there looking at me this whole thing. This has been going on at picoseconds. The whole time you get to it. That's another reason you get tired. There's stuff going on in your body constantly at a phenomenal rate. And we just kind of take it for granted. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Listen, folks, I am absolutely convinced if Darwin knew the chemistry of the eye, he'd have thrown up his hand. My theory absolutely is out the window. I don't want to hear about cup with photosensitive light in the bottom. I want to hear about that. You tell me how that sensitively, finely tuned system, if you don't have the whole system, nothing works. So tell me how you got slight, small modifications over millions of years to produce that. Tell me about 5% sight. That kind of a statement makes no sense. So that was my first one. Behe deals with about 8 examples in his book. Guess how many there are? Thousands. Don't tell me about one complex organ. We could talk about thousands of them. It is utterly incredible. I have a son-in-law. We did a study up at Western Kentucky in his biology course at the master's degree on one little tiny bacteria and how it takes the light to which it's sensitive and it helps regulate that thing so it turns to go a direction away from light. And he studied the chemistry of that. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have time to explain it. It is utterly incredible just for that one little thing to happen. How about blood clotting? You ever watch this? There's your knee after you scraped it on the basketball floor. You were sliding along and scraped it all off. It's a horrible open wound. I know, I've had those. And here's what your body does. Right? And you say, now will you please close that up? You direct your body, right? No, it just doesn't. Blood clotting takes place. Most of us. And here's the chemical reaction. I'm not going to go through all this. You can be spared. But look, I just want to show you some major features. There's an intrinsic pathway that's inside, and there's an extrinsic pathway when you get your tissue damage. So something starts on the surface immediately as soon as you hurt yourself, and there's also something that starts inside immediately. There's a cascade of reactions that take place. And this one intercepts that one at a couple of spots, as you can see. But you see those Roman numerals on there? Guess what they are, class? Thank you. Exactly right. They are distinct proteins that each play a role in blood clotting. And so look, I'll just do this much. When you get finished down here, you have an enmeshed insoluble fibrin that's produced by protein number 13. That's not its name, but that's what I'm talking about. So here you end up with this enmeshed soluble fibrin. That's the thing that covers up the hole. It's the fibrin. Now, class, you all know, don't you, that blood clotting is wonderful or you bleed to death. That's a wonderful thing. Did you know blood clotting is also awful? If it happens in the wrong place at the wrong time, what happens with blood clotting in the wrong place? Strokes, heart attacks, and, well, aneurysms is a bursting of the thing. But it's one of the biggest killers we have. So blood clotting is very sensitive. It has to be done in the right way, at the right time, and then it's got to stop before you clot to death. Right? All right, so here you are. You finally produced this enmeshed insoluble fibrin. And here's what you got. Before that, you have soluble fibrin polymers. And it's not till this last step that you get the insoluble one, which stops the bleeding. Okay? Well, you have to have this process or it won't happen. Before that, you have fibrin monomers. And before that, you have fibrinogen. And it takes thrombin to produce fibrinogen and fibrin monomers. But the thrombin normally exists as prothrombin. If your body had thrombin floating around in it all the time, you'd clot to death. But it doesn't stay like that. It was prothrombin before, and it takes this reaction to turn prothrombin into thrombin. But folks, it takes this reaction to make that start. It takes this one to make that start, this one to make that start, this one to make that start. You got the idea? It's a cascade of reactions. Each of one depends on the other. Now, what do you call a person that doesn't blood clot well? A hemophiliac. We know very well, class, that the most common hemophiliac is one that's missing sufficient for this one step right here. Out of the entire cascade, that piece right there doesn't work at all. And so guess what? You get no blood. That's the problem. The cascade doesn't work if you remove one piece. So Darwin says, how did blood clotting get? Well, it's just little tiny changes over long periods of time while you bleed to death. You can't have this by small steps over long periods of time. Now, here's the other problem, class. If that's all you did, if that cascade of reactions is what took place, you would be dead. Because you clot to death. But your body has built in automatically a process that starts reversing that process chemically. Stop the bleeding. Here's my third one. Here's white blood cells entrapping bacterial cells. The bacterial cells are enemies. I love this discussion because this is like Star Wars. You like science fiction, right? Listen, this is better than science fiction. It's real. White blood cells get after bacteria, and I mean they blow them up. The biochemistry of the immune system is utterly incredible. I'm going to barely touch the hem of the garment. I apologize in advance to your immune system. Here's a cancer cell. Here's some T cells getting after it. T cells, boy, they're your heavy artillery. Look what they do to that cancer cell. They're sucking him dry. That's the cancer cell. That's the T cell. You see what's happening? They're sucking that cancer cell dry. And if your body's working right, cancer doesn't stand a chance. Here's how it ends up. That's what's left of the cancer cell. It looks like a strung out. He's got a lot of stress, would you say? And he's useless because your body has blasted him to smithereens. Okay, now class. You're in my biochemistry class. This is one of the most exciting things you'll ever learn. Because this is the way your body fights off enemies. So look over here. Here are all the enemies. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, foreign proteins. You've got lots of enemies. Did you know you're in a constant battle every second of your life? Sounds like spiritual, doesn't it? A lot of spiritual lessons here. Are you in a constant battle every second of your life with Satan and his agents? You are. You better never let your guard down. Do you know what you need to thank God for first? The largest organ in your body. What is it? It's your skin. We shouldn't talk about skin for a long time. It's the outer gate, the outer wall. Did you know your skin has stuff on it that kills viruses? It's kind of like the old days when they put barbed things on the top of the fences. It's kind of like you're stuck chemically on your skin to knock down viruses. And there's a lot of other interesting things I can tell you about skin. It's an enemy protector. But if something gets inside your skin, which it can if you cut it, or if you go in some of your orifices, be careful what you let go in those openings in your body. Because if something gets inside your body, and particularly into your bloodstream, I would say you're in trouble, except if God has built in, I will say, a plan. Doesn't always work right because we live in a fallen world. But here are the three basic methods by which enemies are destroyed. B lymphocyte cells, T lymphocyte cells, and helper T lymphocytes. Now, do I have time to talk about all this? No. Here's what I'll tell you about the helper T lymphocyte cells. You know Barnabas in the Bible? Barnabas was called the son of encouragement. That's what helper T lymphocytes are. They encourage these two guys. Say, get in there, guys! T lymphocytes help T cells and B cells, especially T cells, to be more effective. You think there's some chemistry behind that? Yes, there's lots of chemistry behind it, which I'm not talking about. How about T lymphocytes? I don't have time to talk about them either. They are the big artillery, folks. They get a hold of a virus-infected cell, and here's what happens. Boom! They're the heavy artillery. They blow them up. Thank God for T cells. I want to talk to you about B cells. It's a fascinating story. B cells. So let's go. First of all, before I leave this slide, let's see if I have a big one. Yeah, here it is. B cells. See right here? If B cell matures, you see this little guy up here on the edge? That's an antibody. Looks like a little triangle, almost. A little V connected to a leg. When they mature, when this B lymphocyte matures, it becomes a veritable factory. Look at how much change here. That's a metamorphosis, ladies and gentlemen, at the cell level. And they turn into a factory that secretes antibodies. But what kind of antibody does it secrete? The specific antibody for that particular B cell. And so it dumps a bunch of antibodies into your body that particularly points out the enemy that's in your body right now. So what B lymphocytes do, I'm going to put this down so I can show you. B lymphocytes produce antibodies. You see me? And what do? Here he is! Come get him! You see him pointing out the enemy? They surround him. And they're all pointing at him. B lymphocyte can't kill anything. Their job is to point out the enemy. And they're good at it. When an enemy invades your system, your body is identifying because of all the B cells you have, it sees them. Uh-oh, this is a bad guy. And it turns into a mature cell and starts producing antibodies by the thousand, which get out there and search through your bloodstream and find every piece of that enemy and say, here he is, bring in the T cells. Pretty amazing. Now here's the problem. How many kinds of enemies do you think you have? And if every antibody is specific to a particular enemy, how many antibodies do you got now? Lots. So can your body produce lots of different antibodies? You watch. First of all, here's your immature B lymphocyte. Here's the enemy. Antigens. Get them! Okay, this B lymphocyte sees that enemy. See how the enemy's attached to him here? That's how it all starts. That's how your body first identifies bad guys. The B cells that are floating around in your blood. Okay, so you've got them identified. So what happens? Here's what happens. That B cell becomes a veritable plasma cell which starts producing that same kind of antibody to go attack every other enemy and point them out. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, that B lymphocyte also produces a memory cell. The memory cell stays in your body for the rest of your life. You know how long an average B cell lasts? They're produced in your spine. The average B cell lasts about 24 hours. You're constantly producing. We call them stem cells. You heard that now? You're constantly producing. But look, once your B cell identifies an enemy, it not only makes a plasma cell, it makes a memory cell, and from then on, that guy remembers that enemy. That's why adults are better at fighting disease than kids. You've got a bunch of memory. I saw you before. You're bad news. That's what the memory cell does. I know you, and then he starts activating, right? Is that incredible, ladies and gentlemen? The memory cell lasts the rest of your life. Until you get Alzheimer's. That's right. That's good. All right, so now you got a bunch of antibodies being produced by this plasma cell, which came from this B lymphocyte. And there's your antibody. I got to tell you a little bit about antibodies, just so I can explain to you why we have so many. You see that antibody list, it has two long chains. See this long chain here? There's two of them. That's called the heavy chain. And then there's two light chains. Here's one and here's one. You see that? And they're hooked together. That's a typical antibody. At the top of the antibody are the binding sites. These have specific chemicals which make them specific to a particular enemy. That's why you have to have a lot of them at different times to attack the enemy. Wrong antibody, can't attack the enemy. Originally, the antibody is attached to this B cell. That's so that the nucleus of the B cell can continue to direct activity. But once the enemy's detected, it starts throwing out antibodies. And by the way, it's really interesting. I wish I had more time to tell you. This antibody sticks on here because it's got gluey stuff at the end there. Literally. It's sticky stuff. Makes it stick with it. When it starts producing the plasma cell with all those antibodies, no sticky stuff. It throws them out. So they're swimming around in your blood looking for you. Fascinating. How does your body make so many different pieces? Stem cells. These stem cells can be produced inside your backbone because the DNA directs it to do it. And it can direct it in such a way you get thousands of different kinds. Okay, class, I'm getting people fading out on me. So we're going to take a little break right here. I don't want to lose you. This is too important. So we're going to stand up. Come on. Shake yourself. Get those antibodies flowing. Oh, me. Listen, I just ate also. I'm glad I'm not sitting down. I am taking this coat off, though. And Shelley, don't let me forget my coat. Well, Shelley's not here. Don't let me forget my coat. Okay, people, do we need to do calisthenics? How about it? All right. All right, you may be seated. Thank you. And listen, I'm feeling sorry for you. That's why I did that. Because I would be sleeping too. This is a little heavy. I want you to understand how it is that one operation like this can produce billions of antibodies. Here's how it happens. In that heavy chain, inside the DNA, 1 out of 250 from cluster 1 in a particular piece of the DNA, there's 1 out of 250 possibilities in that one section. You remember I told you yesterday in our signature in the cell discussion that what we've learned is a lot of pieces of the DNA are doing stuff we didn't know about before? One thing they're doing is they're rearranging stuff in there so you can produce different heavy chains. Guess what it takes to do that? As well as the DNA. So there's 1 out of 250 possibilities there, cluster 1. There's 1 out of 10 from cluster 2. There's 1 out of 6 from cluster 3. And then you can make some recombination jiggles, which takes proteins, and I get another factor of 100. And what you do is multiply all those together. That's 250 times 10 times 6 times 100, which is 1,500,000 combinations. That one thing, ladies and gentlemen, can produce 1,500,000 different heavy chains. Let's go along. Okay? How does it happen? Different pieces of DNA. You have all those choices. And it does it at random, different ones. And it's flipping out of your spine all the time. Well, I want you to get out. You need to do better, Spencer. All right, but that's just the heavy chain, people. The light chains, you can get a similar process that yields 10,000 combinations. To make an antibody, you need 2 heavy chains and 2 light chains, right? So you have to count them together. Matching 1 light chain gene with 1 heavy chain gene at random gives a grand total of 10,000 times 1.5 million, or 15 billion combinations. Your body, without any direction from anybody, automatically can take 15 billion different things. That's probably enough to handle about any enemy you got. But once the enemy attacks, the one antibody for that enemy, you're my enemy, we kind of Timothy on the enemy. Come get him! And the T cells smash into his food. Remember? That's right. And then it's got a memory cell floating around if he ever comes back again, or anybody like him. But here's what's interesting. The antibody that identifies this enemy produces a plasma cell that produces nothing but that one enemy. That's fascinating. Now, there's still 15 billion other ones out there. But once you find that enemy, that produces thousands of that antibody for that enemy, which identifies it, which then allows the big artillery to come in, like Star Wars. Special. You think there's a lot of chemistry behind T cells, which we're not even talking about? So there's your humoral immunity, it's called. B cells. Stem cells are critically important to your survival. But once the antibody is bound to the enemy, here's what you got to understand. The enemy's not dead yet. You got to call in the truth. I'm just going to show you this. Does that look like another cascade? Every one of those steps is a chemical reaction, which I can tell you the chemistry of. I'm not going. Every one of those steps. And guess what? The final step down here is blowing up the enemy. But it requires this step, which requires these two, which requires that one, which requires those two, which requires these two. Now tell me, Mr. Darwin, is this a complex system that cannot possibly have happened by small, successive, slight modifications over eons of time? The immune system doesn't work without the cascade. You take one piece out of that cascade, it stops working. And we haven't even talked about these two. I'm skipping that because you're worn out. Don't think I wouldn't like to talk about it. So in his book, he talks about examples of irreducible complexity in biochemistry of vision, blood clotting, the immune system. What he means by irreducible complexity, ladies and gentlemen, is something has to all be there or nothing works. And there are thousands of those at the chemical level. So he ends his book this way. By irreducibly complex, I mean a single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of these parts causes the system effectively to cease function. Listen, Behe has been destroyed by his scientific compatriots because his book supports creation. He has been blasted. And here's what a lot of scientists say. There's no such thing as irreducibly complex. Maybe some of those pieces were doing something else before, and they evolved into doing this complex process. But before, they were doing something different. And over time, they evolved. And so piece by piece, it did happen. You can believe that, I got a bridge to sell you. But look into it for yourself. These scientific obstacles serve as stark examples of the mountains and chasms that block a Darwinian explanation of life. Folks, it's like the 3-foot ditch or the Grand Canyon. These chemical obstacles are Grand Canyon. How do you get across it? Oh, I jumped across some little steps. Well, where's the evidence? Oh, it disappeared after all that. The results of these cumulative efforts to investigate the cell, to investigate life at the molecular level, is a loud, clear, piercing cry of design. The result is so unambiguous and so significant that it must be ranked as one of the greatest achievements in the history of science. The discovery rivals those of Newton and Einstein, Lavoisier and Schrödinger, Pasteur and Darwin. The observation of the intelligent design of life is as momentous as the observation that the earth goes around the sun, or that disease is caused by bacteria, or that radiation is emitted in quanta. The magnitude of the victory gained at such great cost through sustained effort over the course of decades would be expected to send champagne corks flying in labs around the world. This triumph of science should evoke cries of eureka from 10,000 throats, should occasion much hand-slapping and high-fiving, and perhaps even an excuse to take the day off. This is all Behe. I love the way he says it. But no bottles have been uncorked. No hand slapped. Instead, a curious, embarrassed silence surrounds the stark complexity of the cell. When the subject comes up in public, feet start to shuffle and breathing gets a bit labored. In private, people are a bit more relaxed. Many explicitly admit the obvious, then stare at the ground, shake their heads, and let it go at that. We're just going to ignore it. I think there's psychological reasons for that. And then he gives this illustration. He says it's like this, class. There's a bunch of people on the floor here looking around in an empty room, a huge empty room. Right in the middle of the room is an elephant. And everybody's looking around. Nobody's seeing the elephant. Why does the scientific community not greedily embrace its startling discovery? Why is the observation of the design handled with intellectual thought? Why is it everybody's ignoring the obvious? The dilemma is while one side of the elephant is labeled intelligent design, the other side might be labeled God. And we're not allowed that. Listen, I had professors tell me, we're not letting God's foot in the door. If you exclude the only other alternative, I could win that argument. And that's exactly what that is. We only allow natural causes or it's not science. And I say intelligent design is perfectly legitimate in science, even if it can't tell you all about that designer. It can point you to evidence of design. And if you miss that, you just miss one whole realm of science. And that's not complexity is overcome. Yes, Mr. Darwin, I can present you with a complex organ that could not possibly be formed by numerous successive slight modifications. And therefore your theory absolutely falls down. That's where I am, class. I hope I've given you enough information that you're there too. And if not, study it some more and don't just believe me. Okay, that's it. One big